Good morning, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome back to Law and Crime. This is where we cover some of the most interesting live trials in the country today. And I'm so happy you're joining us because we have a lot to talk about. So are you ready? I hope so. Are you ready? Okay, let's do it. Let's start off with a case that we've been covering yesterday. It's the case of David Copperfield. That's right, we were out in Las Vegas covering this case, a really important case for the world of magic. And also just an interesting case overall. It's not a criminal case, it's a civil case. David Copperfield and the MGM Grand and some other defendants, I should say, are being sued by a man named Gavin Cox. Gavin Cox was an audience member in one of David Copperfield's shows. He was a participant in the Lucky 13 Disappearing Act. And he says that he got injured as a result of the trick, that he slipped on some construction debris. He was being rushed out during the course of the trick. It was bad lighting. And his injuries, and he says he's suffered some significant injuries, including a brain lesion on his head and injuries to his spine and shoulder. It's all David Copperfield and the MGM Grand's fault. Well, David Copperfield and the MGM Grand are not having any of this. They said, we didn't do anything wrong. We've been doing this show for 15 years. Almost 100,000 people have been participants in this show, and no one ever got injured before. It's not our fault. Well, the interesting part about this case is that Mr. Copperfield, the magician himself, was on the stand. That's right. He's been on the stand for about 3 days, and I think it's going to continue today. We have a short summary of what's been happening in the case, so take a look.
World-famous illusionist David Copperfield might be forced to break the cardinal rule of magic and reveal the secrets of his illusions in open court. Copperfield is being sued in Las Vegas civil court by 57-year-old Gavin Cox, who claims he was injured during a 2013 Copperfield show in Las Vegas. The British tourist, who once cooked for British royalty, claims he fell and struck his head on the ground after tripping over construction debris as one of Copperfield's assistants whisked him and other audience members through a dark, secret passageway during the disappearing stunt. Cox claims he suffered brain trauma and is forced to wear an oxygen lung at night because he stops breathing when he's asleep. He's seeking punitive damages from Copperfield and MGM for alleged negligence. The illusionist and hotel strongly deny all claims, stating Cox's injuries were pre-existing and or unrelated medical conditions. This is Aaron Keller for the Law and Crime Network.
No matter how many times I see that report from Aaron about the David Copperfield case, I can't help but love when David Copperfield is trying to get out of that straitjacket. It's just so funny. Can't get over it. I want to talk a little bit more about this case. So I want to bring in right now Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, good to see you as always.
Good morning again.
Good morning. So here's my question. We talked about it a little bit in the break, and you mentioned it. Why is this at trial in the sense that David Copperfield's a pretty rich guy? MGM Grand is a pretty expensive property.
Right.
I've been there myself. My question is, why didn't they settle this? Is it something, a statement of some kind?
You know, that's my question too, and usually what it comes down to is money, honey. So as you pointed out, this is a civil case. It's not a criminal case. Nobody's going to jail no matter what happens here, right? And in any civil case where someone is alleging negligence, you have to be able to show, if you're the one claiming the negligence, that somebody else's negligence directly caused your injury. So apparently the Copperfield camp is saying, well, wait a minute, we didn't do anything wrong. We weren't negligent, therefore we couldn't cause your injury, so we don't owe you a dime. Perhaps that is them trying to make a statement, because ordinarily, Jesse, when you have a case like this, you got somebody who can write a check, you agree on the amount of the check, you write the check, and the case goes quietly away. As you can see, not the case here.
Because the danger is bringing it into court. Obviously, there's the fear that secrets will be revealed. If you settled it out of court, made him sign a non-disclosure agreement, nothing, you can't talk about the trick, I'm going to pay you off. Unless it really is a statement, I'm a consummate professional, my team are consummate professionals, we run a tight ship, no one ever got hurt. How dare you accuse us of doing something wrong? And let's not forget, Jonna, according to Benedict Morelli, who is the plaintiff's attorney, two more women are going to come, two other participant members are going to come forward and say that they got injured now as a result of this Lucky 13 Disappearing Act. All of a sudden, they come forward, and it's not even entirely clear whether they want compensation, they want to make a statement. I find the timing of that a bit unusual.
Well, you know, there's safety in numbers, so to speak, right? So if one person comes forward and they're claiming injury and they're successful, then other people might say, let me rewrite history a little bit. I think I hurt myself too in the back of that stage. But you also have to remember, people slip and fall. This is really a slip and fall case, right? They were having fun. They voluntarily participated in this trick.
The flip side is that they didn't know what the trick was going to consist of. They knew that they had to do something.
We never do. We never know what the trick is. We see this on TV and on stage all the time. But if you trip over something that's open and obvious, and I know the plaintiff is claiming it wasn't open and obvious because it was dark, but if there's construction and you trip over something that you should have seen, that also will help the defense say, this was not negligence on our part. Look with your eyeballs next time. But seriously, but that goes to whether there was negligence or not. I know, if only.
It's a case about whether it's trip or slip. Was it David Copperfield's fault? Was it the MGM Grand? Was it construction crew? Was it Gavin Cox? That's what we're going to see. We're going to cover that here on Law and Crime. As soon as we have a feed, we'll make sure to go to it and update you throughout the day about the case. But that is not the only case that we're covering here on Law and Crime. We are also covering the Shawn Grate case out of Ohio. So now we're getting out of the civil arena and we're going back to our bread and butter. We're going back to the criminal arena. Now, this is no laughing matter, this case, not at all. Shawn Grate is an accused serial killer. He's on trial for 23 separate charges, but the jux of the charges is about the killing of these two women, Elizabeth Griffith, who was 29, and Stacy Hicks, who was 43 years old, and also the kidnapping and rape of an unidentified woman who actually made a 911 phone call and got the police to this residence. Grate was arrested. They found these decomposed bodies. They found this kidnapped girl. Unbelievable story. What we've seen on this happening in court so far, and it's been pretty compelling to watch. Yesterday, in fact, we saw, the jury at least, saw photos of the dead victims. They also saw many photos of Grate's home and Elizabeth Griffith's apartment. Now, if you look at Grate's home, yikes. I mean, that is just the one word to describe this when you see maggots all over the place, decomposed bodies. And I have to tell you, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this is the best way to explain it. There was an instrument that was probably used for sexual assault. It was what seemed to be a pole wrapped in condoms. I can't believe I'm even saying this. Jonna has her head down. Ladies and gentlemen, again, this is no laughing matter. We have a short report about this case. And again, it's kind of a preview to show you some of the opening statements in this case. I should say the opening statement from the prosecution. The defense never made an opening statement, but this was the prosecution's opening statement, and it clarifies and helps explain some of the more disturbing details in this case. Take a look.
The trial of a suspected serial killer, 41-year-old Shawn Grate, is underway in Ashland, Ohio. Grate is accused of kidnapping and sexually assaulting a woman, and he's been charged in connection with the murders of two other women in an abandoned house. Grate was arrested when that woman he was holding captive was able to call 911 while he was asleep.
What's the problem? I've been abducted. Who abducted you? Shawn Grate. Where's she at now? Asleep.
In an opening statement, prosecutor Christopher Tunnell made it clear this case was not a whodunit.
The evidence will show beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant was found asleep and naked in bed in a house that a terrified naked woman escaped from after being repeatedly assaulted and raped by this defendant. Two decomposing bodies were found inside, having been kidnapped and murdered by this defendant.
He also went into detail about the defendant's involvement in the murder of two women found inside that abandoned house.
Even as he gives multiple versions of his killing Elizabeth to Detective Major, and he admits to killing Elizabeth Griffith. What exactly happened to Elizabeth Griffith, we'll never know. It would seem that after Stacy bought the defendant a cup of coffee at BP, she gave him a ride back to his place on Covert Court. And once inside that house, she never left. Recall that officers in their initial sweep of the residence, after forcing their way into the basement, sensed something was terribly wrong downstairs from the smell. The stench of death was strong. And after Stacy was strangled, she was wrapped in a basement and taken down the basement steps.
The prosecutor summed up his opening statement by reiterating there is no doubt the defendant is guilty of these alleged heinous crimes.
The evidence will show this is not a whodunit case. The evidence will show that this defendant is guilty of all 23 counts as contained in the indictment, all specifications thereto, beyond a reasonable doubt.
The defense did not give an opening statement, at least not yet. Grate faces 23 counts, including aggravated murder and kidnapping. If convicted, he could face the death penalty. For the Law and Crime Network, this is Aaron Keller.
That's the prosecutor in the Shawn Grate case explaining some of the horrific details about how this all unfolded. Again, I'm here with Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, I'm looking at the courtroom feed. We're waiting to go live. But a lot of questions in this case, including, and you mentioned it before, do you think it's necessary for the jurors to see photos of the dead bodies? And I know that they might even see a cell phone footage of one of the rape of one of these women. Is that necessary?
I find it actually appalling, and I truly don't see how it's necessary. Now, look, jurors get to see autopsy photos all the time when there's a homicide case before them, and I even have a little bit of a problem with that, but I can understand it. Here, just to show gruesome photos of dead bodies, and when there really is no question that this person is responsible for their death. And then as the precursor, during the opening statements, the prosecutor said, I'm going to show you recorded footage of a rape. Why? I mean, listen, is it absolutely necessary for the prosecution to show that in order to prove an element of the crime? If it is, then so be it. You have to prepare the jurors.
Nothing's as good as video evidence of any crime. So if you have evidence of the guy actually committing a crime, I mean, isn't it necessary?
I just think, I don't know if in this case, with all the other evidence that they're going to have, including confessions, whether it is actually necessary. And it's going to leave an impression on the jury, not just for purposes of this trial, Jesse, and whether they come to a guilty verdict or not. It's going to leave an impression for the rest of your life. It's hard to look at autopsy photos and get them out of your head. I can't imagine watching a rape happen on a video recorder and being able for jurors who don't do this for a living to be able to set that aside.
It's a really dark world when you think about. I was watching Ed Staley on the stand yesterday, the BCI expert. I'm just listening to all the things he discovered in that house of horrors, which is the term I think I've maybe coined for this, that house. And you just think about what he's seen, and then you have jury members who were called in to now be a part of this case, and what they're being exposed to. And I talk about that instrument, that sex instrument, I guess that's one way, that sex object.
Yeah.
I mean, how much can they take before they're not swayed by all of this evidence, in the sense that I know the defense still has to put on their case, but how are they not initially swayed and said, wow, this guy's guilty?
Well, and that's going to be really tough. And if, this defendant doesn't have much of a choice but to go to trial. I don't know if they made him any offer pre-trial because it is a death penalty case. But you have to, as a defense attorney or as a prosecutor, you have to prepare jurors for this kind of evidence as you are picking them. Because some people are really faint of heart, as we say, and they wouldn't be great jurors for you. And so without trying your case in voir dire, you've got to let them know what's coming, and this is just really, really tough.
The defense waived an opening statement. Why?
It's not that uncommon, and part of the reason why usually if I were to do it, you let the prosecutor lay out their case, and then you wait for the actual facts to unfold during their case, and then before you begin your case is when you give your opening statement. So it's sort of along the lines of primacy and recency. You get to do it right before you're going to lay out your evidence. You might change your strategy depending on what happens in the prosecution's case in chief, which is another reason to withhold your opening statement until you know what you're going to be bringing in your defense.
Yeah, and we're talking about Shawn Grate. We have a live feed in the courtroom. There's no audio yet. Nothing started, but we do see the defendant right there. That's Shawn Grate. He's being blocked right now, but I'll do a million trials. I've covered so many, and I just look at the defendant, and I try to think what's going on in their mind. Especially I did in the Tex MacGyver case because I didn't know what was going on in them. And you try to read something from looking at them. And if all of this is true, If all of the accusations leveled against him are true and all of these horrific details are true, I just look at him and I wonder, how is someone capable of this? And Jonna, I have to tell you, I did a little stalking of your Twitter page before you came on. You said you were coming on, and you said this guy reminded you a little bit of which famous serial killer?
Jeffrey Dahmer.
In what way?
A couple of reasons. Well, number one, and listen, we can't judge any books by their covers, right? But Jeffrey Dahmer was sort of this clean-cut, okay-looking. I know he was a disgusting murderer, so please don't send me any hate mail. He was a clean-cut, okay-looking guy. If you passed him on the street, you wouldn't automatically be like, oh, man, he's a serial killer who eats people. You wouldn't say that. This guy has that same, he just looks like the average Joe. Not that we really know what serial killers look like or they have a look, but he's got this sort of clean-cut, Poindexter kind of look to him, but yet he had this secret life where he was killing people and storing them in his house.
Unbelievable. And what's crazy is, as you said it, you walk by people on the street, you don't know who is doing what. I mean, we covered the Donald Smith case, John, and I don't remember if you were on with me. I think you were. You look at that guy, seems like an innocent old man, and he turned out to be a monster.
A monster.
So hard to judge, but everything is appearance. And we talked about this maybe the other day, the idea that the defense may be trying to say that this guy is mentally unstable, talk about different things that he suffers. If you look at the way he looks in court, he looks a bit disheveled. I think he's put on weight since he's been in jail. He's not wearing a suit. He's not wearing a jacket. I wonder if they kind of made the look of, hey, this guy is not entirely all there.
I don't know if that is so much intentional, and I'll be honest with you, if it were intentional, I think that's unfair and a bit unethical. You have to present, your defendant is who your defendant is, right? You can't, I know that sometimes we dress them up to make
Look at me breaking ethics rules over here.
No, I mean, you would never break an ethics rule, but I think this is just his natural state. He's in custody. He might not own a suit for all. I mean, where do you think they dress the defendant when you're in custody? You get clothes from your home, or somebody buys them for you, and then you put them on so you're not in an orange jumpsuit in front of the jury, because that's also prejudicial. But he just looks, and again, he just looks like anybody that you would run. He could be at the office. Anybody you would run into at the water.
Well, I hope not an office that I'm working at here at Law&Crime. I hope not.
I'm sure not.
Jonna, stand by. What I want to do right now is play that 911 phone call. Remember, the police found Grate. They found this woman who was kidnapped. They found these decomposed bodies after listening to this 911 phone call. So let's listen to that right now.
911, what is the address to your emergency?
4th Street, Laundromat.
What's the problem?
I've been abducted.
Who abducted you?
Shawn Grate.
Where's she at now?
Asleep.
Where's she sleeping at?
In the bedroom. Please hurry.
Does he have a weapon?
He's got a taser.
Are you tied up now?
Yeah, but I kind of freed myself. Are they on the way?
Yeah, we have officers we're sending.
Please send enough.
Hey, if you're worried, you don't have to talk. You can just set the phone down, okay? I just need to hear if the officers find you or not.
Oh shit, I woke him up.
You just set the phone down. Okay, can you get to the door where you can see out? Huh? Can you get out of the house?
Locked.
It's locked. Are you at the door?
Yeah, I am.
She's at the door.
Come on, hurry up, get out of here. Where is it?
Bedroom sleeping.
Still sleeping?
Yeah.
Okay, they have her.
He went on her armed.
Unarmed?
Yeah.
All right. Right now. Do it. Go through
Pretty amazing when you can capture that drama so everyone can hear it, and the jurors did hear the full 911 phone call the other day. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live in the Shawn Grate case. The judge is speaking, so let's listen in live.
Anything about this case? Haven't talked to anybody? Okay, thank you. Juror 156, have you been complying? Juror 145, have you been complying with the court's general order of admonition? Juror 131, Juror 133, Juror 17, Juror 87, Juror 23, Juror 92, Juror 97, Juror 34, Juror 3, Juror 6, except as we discussed. Juror 49, Juror 94.
That's some preliminary work right there. The judge is asking each of the jurors, have they watched any of the media? Have they not been biased? Jonna, that's standard, right? But it's difficult. It's difficult when you have Law and Crime covering it. I hope none of the jurors are watching it. But when you have a big case like this, it's really hard. Look at the Copperfield case. The jurors in that case were asked by the judge, did you read anything about it? Because the attorney for the plaintiff was doing press conferences and talking to media outlets right before the case started again. It's so hard in these kind of cases.
Think about how hard it is. It's hard enough not to be tempted to want to do your own research and legwork.
Oh, I know I would.
But we live in an age now, Jesse, where we are bombarded with information all the time. It's almost like you can't escape it, right? You can see it on somebody else's phone. So it's tough. It's tough to stay in a bubble when you're.
Well, hopefully none of them are watching this, but I'm glad you're watching this, and we're live in the Shawn Grate case out of Ohio. Let's go right now. Okay, first witness of the day was Nathaniel Kreck, a person that saw the defendant, and one of the victims together right before she disappeared, Stacey Hicks. Now, again, I'm here with Jonna Spilbor. That's more of a witness just to establish the timeline, to establish what was happening. It's not a make-all or be-all witness, right?
No. He didn't have anything earth-shattering to provide, but it is basically just sort of laying a foundation and a timeline, as you said. So he was, as you could see, he was up quickly and off quickly.
Well, it seems to support the prosecution's story of what happened, that he befriended her, tried to help Stacey with her car, and she wanted to help him out. Wanted to help him out, wanted to buy him a cup of coffee. Now, he didn't say he noticed anything unusual. I thought that was an interesting bit.
Well, not every single moment of every day is going to be unusual, I suppose, in this defendant's life. But like you had pointed out, this really was just to sort of put into perspective a timeline so we can establish, what he was doing and when in the moments leading up to him actually getting busted.
Let's talk about some trial practice. So the defense there was asking him, you didn't see who was driving and who was actually, in other words, maybe she was driving, maybe he was driving. Why does that matter?
I don't think it actually matters much unless the defense wants to establish some sort of, there was a genuine friendship between, the defendant and a victim here. Not that wholly matters, because look, none of us, I've never been kidnapped, you've never been kidnapped, I hope. You don't know how you're going to act when you're in with somebody who could potentially kill you and who you fear for your life around.
Right. All right, everybody, let's listen in to the next witness. Again, you're watching the Shawn Grate case out of Ohio. All right, everybody, you're watching the Shawn Grate case out of Ohio. We're learning a little bit about the disappearance of Stacey Hicks. Remember, she is one of the victims in this case. Her decomposed body was found in that house of horrors. Again, I'm here with Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, if you research Mr. Grate, he's had a lot of run-ins with the law. He's been in and out of trouble. I mean, he's been convicted of different crimes in the past, but the jury probably won't hear that, right?
Probably not, and it probably won't matter. I mean, it's no surprise, right? You usually don't go from being a law-abiding citizen to being a disgusting, horrible rapist and murderer, right, like that. So it's no surprise that he's had some run-ins with the law. But most of the time, the jury's not allowed to hear that unless those prior bad acts can show a pattern or motive or plan.
Yeah,
and in this case, I don't know if they need that.
Explain that to me, because it's such a weird, strange line, right? So you can show a pattern that this is something he's done in the past, but aren't you not supposed to convict somebody based upon what they've done in the past? So how do you work that line?
Yeah, so how do you reconcile that? Okay, so the general rule is basically you're not allowed to show somebody's prior bad acts in the past in order to prove that they did something now, right? That's basically the general rule. But there are a few, as there are to every rule, there are a few exceptions. And if somebody is committing a crime that has like a signature earmark that is so distinctive that it's not possible for someone else to be the culprit now because you have a history of these signature crimes,
Right.
then that's one of the exceptions to the character evidence rule.
All right, well, we'll have to see how it plays out. This witness is now under cross-examination. Let's listen in live.
10 p.m. or 1 in the morning.
10 p.m.
I believe so, yes.
and on September 10th.
Correct, sir.
Okay, fine. Thank you, sir.
Redirect.
No, sir.
Thank you, Sergeant Baker. You're excused.
Okay, so again, we're jumping out of there. They're switching witnesses. John and I were just talking about what this guy has done in the past. And one of the other things that he's done is he's confessed to crimes. And how will that play into this case? You know, he wrote letters to a media outlet out in Ohio saying why he killed certain women. What's going on there?
Well, let me give you a little surprise info. So you can confess to a crime. You can confess right now to me that you committed some sort of crime, right? And in order for you to be successfully prosecuted for that crime, there has to be corroboration. Otherwise, you would have people saying they committed crimes all the time, but without corroboration, you can't successfully be prosecuted. So I don't know how much of that, some of those confessions could come in this case, but that doesn't relieve the prosecution of their burden to actually use some additional information to corroborate that those.
Let me get this straight. You're saying if somebody comes forward and goes, I did this, that's not enough to convict somebody?
Not enough. You have to have some. Well, first of all, let's back up. You got to have evidence that there actually is a crime, right? So if I come to you this morning and I go, Jesse, you know what? 10 years ago, I killed somebody at the Piggly Wiggly and nobody ever found their body. What can I be prosecuted for? Because we don't even know that there's been a crime. So now you'd have to do the investigation and make sure that there's some corroboration for that. Otherwise, you know, they say that people who wanted to spend some time in jail because they didn't have any other place to go would confess to crimes that didn't even occur, and it would happen all the time. So that's not the reason. That's one of the reasons I know.
Yeah, because
corroborating evidence.
When we watch these trials, so many of our watchers, and me included, we look at so much like, well, how do we know he did it, or what evidence shows that he was the one? But a lot of times in trial, as entertaining as it can be, a lot of it's building the case and showing that someone did actually die. That's why you have the medical examiner out there. That's why you look at the cause of death, things like that. So it's kind of interesting to see. They might be going to a sidebar right now, but we have to see what happens here between the judge and the attorneys. I have a question for you in terms of the defense. If they are starting to really put on a case later on, what kind of witnesses do they need to call?
Well, okay, so I think the defense is going to have to, even though I read that he has withdrawn, the defendant has withdrawn his insanity defense, the defense is surely going to have to rely on some sort of mental defense. Either he didn't have the mental capacity to know what he was doing, or which is basically an insanity defense, or that he didn't have the mens rea, or he lacked the specific intent. Something having to do with what goes on between this guy's ears is going to have to be front and center. So I imagine one of the things the defense is going to do is bring in expert testimony to talk about what is inside this Shawn Grate's head, and what more importantly, what was in his head at the time that these horrific crimes occurred.
Well, if you research this case, Dr. John Fabian is somebody that they definitely want to call to the stand, somebody who believes that Mr. Grate suffers from several different mental disorders, and that will definitely help the defense's case. We have a new witness on the stand. Let's listen in live. Okay, so you're watching surveillance footage right there in the day in question when Stacy Hicks, you're watching her right there, disappeared. Went to Walmart, bought some gardening supplies. I'm here with Jonna Spilbor. In the overall arc of this case, I guess it's important to track her movements on the day in question.
Yeah, I suppose. At least now we have definitive proof that she was alive at a certain at a certain time of the day, where she was at a certain time of the day. And that's important, again, to establish a timeline in the course of this case. But it's not exactly riveting testimony, Jesse, but I think the prosecution has made its point.
Well, what is kind of eerie is the fact that whenever you look at video of someone who's alive 1 minute and then you know they're going to be deceased a short time later, or what's going to happen to her. Sometimes we've covered videos where they literally pass away moments later in the video. That's the strange part about watching this. So you watch her going on her day, little does she know what's going to happen to her.
Oh, and I'm sure that the jurors have the same thoughts in their minds because, obviously she's buying gardening equipment, clearly, right? I think that's why the prosecution's going through the receipt. She's planning to go home and plant some flowers. She's planning to go home and make her lawn nice. She's not planning to get kidnapped, raped, and murdered. And I'm sure at least some of the jurors are going to be thinking about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, it's interesting when to put on this evidence and when not to, because obviously visuals are the most important thing. Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't it the most important visuals, audio, that kind of evidence you really want?
Well, I think it's the jurors really believe it. It's easy for them to understand. They can see it. I don't know if there's sound on this video, but they can actually visualize it. There's no question that the evidence is what it is, as opposed to other types of evidence where they have to sort of make inferences and put pieces together. They don't have to do that with this.
Right. All right, let's watch a little bit more of the video and we can see what's happening again for Stacey Hicks. All right, everybody, again, you're in the Shawn Grate case out of Ohio. You're watching this surveillance footage of Stacey Hicks buying gardening supplies the day in question when she ultimately was kidnapped. And that's the eerie part. Now, it's not just about her. We also know that in this case, Mr. Grate has been charged with the murder of Elizabeth Griffith and also with the kidnapping and rape of a third woman. Jonna, again, I'm here with Jonna Spilbor. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for that woman who made that 911 call, and again, she's been unidentified, we are not naming her,
right.
But that 911 call that we've played here on the network and that the jury heard on the first day, right. Who knows what could have happened? This guy, again, he is innocent until proven guilty, but who knows what could have still happened?
Well, he could have amassed certainly more victims. And you know what I find just a little bit interesting, and not for anything, I noticed that they show that we see the defendant whispering quite a lot to his defense attorney while this evidence is being presented to the jury. And it's kind of strange for me because this is really, it's innocuous evidence. It's really just there to prove that she was alive at a certain time and where she was at a certain day and time. And it makes me wonder, what could he possibly be saying to his attorney? It's not like there's something controversial where he can say, that's a lie, I never said that. It's just video evidence. So I'm curious about that.
Or it could be a number of things we'll never know, and we're not allowed to know. But I have a question in terms of that. You brought up a good point. What do you think it's like defending people that are put in this kind of, face 23 charges, including being in a house of horrors where there were decomposed bodies? He's charged with raping, kidnapping, murder. I mean, this is a nightmare of a defense. So what's it like defending Shawn Grate, you think?
It is a nightmare. But as a defense attorney, you do have to separate yourself from the conduct of your clients, and I'm sure that his defense attorneys are doing the exact same.
Easier said than done,
yeah,
right? Wouldn't you agree? I mean, again, harken back to Donald Smith, that convicted child kidnapper, rapist, murderer. Defending him, they didn't really have to put on much of a defense. Or look at the Larry Nassar case. That guy, I mean, right. His two attorneys, they were suffering death threats. They were not having an easy time defending that case.
Sometimes it's not always easy, but it's our job.
So if you're the defense, do you think that they will eventually put on a case? Do you think that they're just going to be mostly interested in cross-examining the witnesses? What do you think is going to happen?
I think they have to put on a case that involves the mental state of this defendant. You remember this, no matter what happened, well, unless there's an acquittal, and let me just go on record and saying there's not going to be one, but if there were, unless there were, there's going to be an appeal.
Hey, Jonna, we thought that Tex MacGyver was going to be found guilty of murder.
Don't get me going. I'm upset by that. But, there will be an appeal if he is found guilty because it is a death penalty case. So you, as a defense attorney, you have to do everything you can because you're making a record. You're not just working this case. You're also thinking in terms of what's going to happen down the road.
All right, everybody, let's listen into Josh Smith. He works at Walmart. He is looking at the video surveillance footage. Let's listen in live. Welcome back, everybody. That's Shawn Grate. We have a live feed in the courtroom. That's the case that we're covering. That accused serial killer faces 23 different charges in this case. Jonna, it's interesting when you think about this that the prosecution has a lot of work to do in the sense that they have to try to convict him of 2 separate murders as well as the kidnapping of a third woman. This trial is supposed to last anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. How do you structure that?
Well, I think what the prosecution is doing here is they're essentially taking it from the top. They're starting with, when is the last time we saw any of these people alive? And then they're going to walk the jury, assuming all the witnesses are available when they're supposed to be available, walk the jury sort of chronologically what they believe
But
happened.
they separated. So let's start with Stacy, then we'll move on with Elizabeth, and then we'll move on with the unidentified woman who eventually made that 911 call.
And that's probably the best way to go about it. It might become a little bit redundant, but remember, the prosecution has a job to do, and they have to prove each and every element of each and every crime beyond a reasonable doubt.
Because you don't want them to say, hey, he's definitely guilty of killing Stacey Hicks. Not that much more information on Elizabeth Griffith, but he had to have killed her based upon our evidence. You have to judge it separately, right?
Yes, you have to judge it separately. And remember, the jurors are allowed to make inferences because, look, a lot of crimes often happen where you don't have eyewitnesses to every single element. They're going to have to connect the dots, and it's the prosecution's job to at least provide the dots and some evidence to connect them all, and then the jury gets to do the rest.
And we watched the prosecution's opening statements, okay? He took this time explaining the facts and then read word by word the language of the statute matching it. Look, we came out of the Tex MacGyver case where there's a lot of discussion about whether or not the jurors, there was confusion about the wording of the law.
Right.
This seems very complex when you have a 23-count indictment.
Yes, and it can be very confusing. And it's also just a little odd to be talking about the law in your opening statement, because really the opening statement is a roadmap of the facts. Here's what you're gonna hear, jury. Not so much the law. We bring that in closing argument.
All right, we have another witness now in the Shawn Grate case. Let's listen in live. Okay, so we're better understanding Stacey Hicks' day. Stacey Hicks is one of the victims here in the Shawn Grate case. We know she went to Walmart to get some supplies, some gardening supplies. We know that she went to go get her nails done. Seemed like a typical day that ended in a horrible tragedy. Again, I'm here with Law&Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. I think they're leading up to eventually when she ultimately meets Grate. Is that what you see?
I think that's what they're doing. Obviously, we now know that when she was alive on a certain day, we know that because we have great testimony and video evidence of that. And then eventually, she is going to meet him, and then we aren't going to have any more video evidence of her getting her nails done or buying supplies, are we? Because we all know, well, according to her, that, well, not according to her, but according to another witness, that it ended badly, her relationship.
Yeah. It's so disturbing to see how this happens. And again, we're looking at a live courtroom feed, and you look at the defendant, you see him with his attorneys trying to figure out what they may do. And again, we've talked about this. One of the weirder aspects about this case is that it's now being separated. It's bifurcated. So, Jonna, let's talk about that for a second. We know that the first part, what the jury's hearing, is the guilt or innocence phase. Then the second phase is to determine sexually violent predator specifications.
Right.
If they find him guilty of both, then they move on to sentencing. What is going on here?
It's very confusing for us as well. I've not had a three-part trial before in a case like this, but I'm assuming that the sexual predator portion of this program is going to prove whether there are sufficient aggravating factors to move this case along. And that's why, even if I read that he withdrew his insanity defense, but this case is all about his mental state of mind and what is going on inside this man's head. So I believe that's why we have to have so many pieces to this trial, and that's really the crux of the defense.
Yeah, yes, and that's a good point, but what other ways could the defense say, hey, listen, this guy shouldn't be found guilty, or this guy, you know what, Jonna, let's stand by. We have another witness. We don't want to miss any of this testimony, so let's listen in live.
Great.
Okay, everybody, they're going to a little morning break here in the Shawn Grate case. Now, again, I'm here with Law&Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, that last witness is someone who identified Shawn Grate. Now, in the night in question, I love the lawyering here. You could identify him from the side of his face, from the upstairs window. That's classic lawyering, right?
Classic lawyering. And the jury's going to have to weigh that. I mean, the defense attorney's making a little bit of a point. It wasn't like they were very close to each other. She was in an upper window. It wasn't like she had a full-on view.
Right.
And it was a little bit weird, unless I'm confused, that she kind of recognized him from where she shops.
Right.
At the, I forget what the name
I mean,
of the store was.
he's memorable to her in a certain way. And we heard earlier today one of the officers say that he interviewed Jonna Smith, who was just on the stand, because she was one of the people that saw Mr. Grate in the night in question. But yeah, you never know who stands out to you, unless the theory is, the criticism is, she only remembered him because his name was put in the media.
Oh, I'll guarantee it that she has sort of a revisionist history, because that's what does happen. Your mind can change based on how you perceive something right now. So if she saw him in the media, she keeps saying, I saw him in the media. Then her brain, and it's not even like a person does it on purpose. Your brain can actually put pieces together that really actually weren't there.
Yeah.
Which is why sometimes there's a problem with eyewitness testimony in trials. Not that this piece is going to make or break the case. It certainly is not going to. But that's why the defense attorney, he must have said like 6 times, you recognize him from the side of his face, the side of his face.
Just so the jurors keep hearing that,
So the
right?
jurors know that her version of events might not be accurate.
Well, we'll have to see, as always with everything. Now, what I want to do right now, we talked about it earlier, the testimony of Ed Staley. He was the BCI agent who went into this house of horrors and collected the evidence and found the decomposed bodies. His testimony yesterday was pretty riveting. He was on the stand for quite some time. I want to play you some of that from yesterday. Take a look. I know it's not easy to hear, but listening to Ed Staley talk about what he found in that house is really important for the prosecution's case and also for the defense's case, because they're going to have to ultimately try to defend their client, Shawn Grate, in this 23-count indictment. Again, I want to bring in Jonna Spilbor. John, I know our time together is coming to an end, unfortunately, for this morning. But Mr. Grate has a lot at stake here, not only in this case, but he's admitted to being involved in other crimes, including murdering other people outside of this. Now, that also includes an unidentified woman who went missing. He said that he killed somebody that was selling magazines. He admitted to the killing in 2007. Now, what the investigators have done is something cool. It's called isotope testing. They found these bones of this unidentified person. They do tests on the bones, and they're able to match that up with a missing persons database. They're hoping that Mr. Grate will help them tell them which one of these people he killed. Now, what would be his incentive if you're representing him to tell them, oh, I killed this woman?
Well, the only incentive is if they take the death penalty off the table, if perhaps he's not going to have to, get a lethal injection. Then and only then would I suppose he would be incentivized to help out the prosecution. And typically, I think those conversations happen before a trial like this. We're not privy to them, but we have to assume that they happen. And can I raise one more thing that's not exactly related to that, but it's something that's bothering me. So when we're listening to this witness testify about the stench in the home, the maggots, right? This is what happens when flesh of any kind decomposes, right? And he's living there. Yeah. Okay. So what does that mean to somebody? Like, is that because he is so mentally deranged that he wants to have a disgusting reminder of his crimes, or is he so mentally deranged that, I don't know, if you're mentally deranged, does it not bother you to have the stench of decomposing dead bodies and maggots all around you? Like, who does that?
I think you're asking us to get into the mind of people that we don't want to get into the mind of.
But the jury has to get into this guy's mind. They're going to have to do it. And it's just, even, okay, so I likened him to Jeffrey Dahmer. At least Jeffrey Dahmer tried to put body parts in freezers where you wouldn't be overcome.
Keeping them fresh, Jonna?
You wouldn't be
overcome. Keeping them cold and nice and fresh?
Like, how do you live that way? And if you, something else. I've had people in my life who, let's say they had a lot of animals, and that odor can sometimes get on clothing. Sure. Right? So if he's living in that house with decomposing bodies, and he is going out and doing things, how is that odor not on him all the time? raising red flags to anybody he comes in contact with.
That's a good point. We don't know his travel habits so much. We are looking at the travel habits of some of the victims right now, and that's important to see. But Jonna, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this case. We can't wait to have you back on.
Oh, this case is something else. Thank you, Jesse. I can't wait to be back with you.
Sounds good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as we wait for the live feed again in the Shawn Grate case out of Ohio, I want to continue playing for you the testimony of Ed Staley, the BCI agent who had to investigate this house that Jonna just described. Let's listen in.